Okay, since it's, woo, that's loud. Since it is 4:30, we're gonna go ahead and get started. We're all gonna become nerds. The very last program of the day, and we're gonna become great big old nerds. So I love that. We're very lucky to have Matt here. He's gonna teach us all about climate and weather in Kentucky and how it affects our agriculture. So instead of listening to me, I'm gonna let you talk to Matt.
Okay, guys, last one. I'm the one that separates you guys from Kentucky basketball at 8 o'clock. So anyways, my name's Matt Dixon. I'm a meteorologist at something called the UK Ag Weather Center. You guys know all the broadcast meteorologists around here, Bill Meck, Chris Bailey. Some of you may be from Western Kentucky, but there's other types of meteorologists out there. I'm an agricultural meteorologist. I actually grew up in southwestern Indiana, and I was on a watermelon-based operation over that way. So we had some sandy soils, watermelon, cantaloupe thrive on those, and that's what I did for about 7 or 8 years. And then I went to Purdue University, got my atmospheric science degree. This job opened at UK, had the agricultural side, had the meteorological side, so put the two together. It was a perfect job for me. So anyways, that's me. Today I'm going to talk about the fact that we need to all become climate nerds now. So we're all weather nerds in some shape or form. I don't see very many winter coats out there today, so you all were paying attention to the forecast, and we're constantly checking the forecast, especially in agriculture. Ag and weather go hand in hand. But I want to look longer term. The changes we've been seeing in our climate the past several decades, even the past century. We're getting warmer and wetter here in the state of Kentucky and across much of the eastern half of the United States. So I'm going to talk about some of these changes, some of the impacts we've already seen in the agricultural sector, some that may become more prevalent in the years ahead. And anyways, try to prompt some thoughts on how this may impact your operation, how you may change your production or management strategies going forward. So climate has been changing. We've been seeing the impacts in a large way recently, especially in terms of natural disasters. The frequency of these natural disasters are increasing. I actually started this presentation with a look at the Beattyville, Kentucky flooding in late February of 2021. Seems like a lot of people forget about this flooding event. This happened before the tornadoes, before the eastern Kentucky flooding this past year, but this was an area that was part of 2 rounds of flooding in the past couple of years. So anyways, I'm going to break this presentation up. I always like to have a little bit of fun, so I got some weather trivia here. I want to talk about the difference between weather and climate. Weather is what we get, or climate is what we expect. Talk about this changing climate in Kentucky, how it's impacting agriculture, and then sources of climate and weather information across the state of Kentucky and the Midwest region. So starting out with weather trivia. Anybody from Frankfort here? Yeah, several people. No, you are. What is the highest annual rainfall ever recorded at Frankfort Capital City Airport? A, 62 inches, B, 55, C, 69 inches, or D, 82. So show of hands for A. Okay, nobody's on A. How about B? I got one B. C? Several C. What about D? And several Ds. So it's actually 68.94 inches, and that occurred back in 2018. I know we had the drought this past fall, but we've had quite a few super wet years around here. And 2018 tops the list here in Frankfort, 68.94 inches. On average, Frankfort averages about 50 inches per year, maybe a little less than that. So quite a bit of precipitation that year. All right, next one. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. I always like to associate these with a big-time event back in the day. We talked about the flooding in eastern Kentucky last year. Some of you may have heard of this, maybe not, but this was the Great Flood of 1937. So disasters have always been part of our history. This was one of the major ones back in the day. This happened in January of 1937. So 70% of Louisville was underwater. This picture in the lower right-hand corner, any guesses on what that is? Churchill Downs. So black and white photo, you can see the water reflecting off the streets and even on the Derby track there. So equivalent of $3.3 billion in damages. The water crested at 85.5 feet, which is 30 feet above flood stage. They saw 15 inches of rain in 12 days. Now, 15 inches of rain in 12 days, that's a lot of water, especially that time of year where it's mostly all runoff at that point. So a lot of rainfall. You guys see the picture up in the upper right-hand corner? No, horses can't climb trees, but the waters rose. Horse got caught in that current, got caught in a tree, the water receded, and the horse is still up there, unfortunately. So I'm going to make it easy, math-wise. You take a guy there at 6 feet tall, 6 feet, 12 feet, about 18 feet to the hind legs, 24 feet to the head. So a lot of water back in January 1937. But we had flooding back in the day. We're still seeing it today, and we will see more in the years ahead. Next one. What is the coldest temperature ever recorded in the state of Kentucky? Minus 23, minus 7, minus 44, or minus 37. I'll give you guys a hint. It did not occur back in December this year. So, A, minus 23. Several are saying A. B, minus 7. No? C, minus 44. Or D, minus 37. All right, I see 4 or 5 that put their hands up for minus 37. So you remember 1994, Shelbyville? We're pretty close. So anyways, very cold night. This event, the anniversary of it wasn't too long ago. But looking more recently, we did have the cold temperatures back in December. Prior to that, the last big-time Arctic air event was back in 2015. I remember this event very distinctly. We got, I believe it was 17 inches of snowfall in Lexington, but you'll notice, see if I can get this clicker on here, Madison County right there dropped all the way to minus 32 after this event. So they were approaching state record territory, and I was up half the night because we had already canceled UK and just making sure that forecast verified. But minus 32 degrees, something we don't typically see here in the state of Kentucky. Luckily with this event, we didn't have the 40-mile-per-hour winds like we had back in December. So, what is the highest wind speed ever recorded by a weather station in Kentucky? A, 170 miles per hour. B, 85 miles per hour. C, 100, or D, 120. So, A's out there. 2 A's. B, 85. Got one. C, 100. Several C's. Or D, 120.1. All right. I think majority rules. So D, 120.1 miles per hour. So this actually occurred with that tornado outbreak back in December of 2021. There was a Mesonet station at Princeton, our UK research and education center out there. And I actually went out and saw it the day after, and it reached 120.1 miles per hour. It did not take a direct hit from the tornado. The path of this tornado was close, I would say a quarter mile away. But anyways, this is the picture I took of that weather station the day after. This had a 10-meter tower on it, and there was actually an anemometer, measures wind speed at the top of it, and that went down at about 70 miles per hour. But there's another anemometer, oh, sorry, right there, and that's a cup anemometer, and it kept on spinning and got to 120 miles per hour. So I'm kind of surprised some of the lower level sensors stayed intact based on the damage I saw just a quarter mile away, but they did. So, and we'll talk more about this Kentucky Mesonet a little later. So, all right, folklore or truth. Rain is close by when bees stay close to the hive. Any beekeepers in here? We got one, two. So is that folklore or truth? We're getting some thumbs up for truth, so, and that is exactly it. So, are you going 4 for 4 on this quiz so far? Good, good, good. So, maybe I got another meteorologist back there. So, but yeah, bees can sense the change in barometric pressure and humidity, which can indicate the coming rain. Bees can then prepare as they need to for rain. So, there's a lot of insects, animals that work this way. So. Sorry, what's the question?
Google challenge the record for Louisville in 1994 minus 22 below zero. It's hard to imagine Shelbyville was that much colder.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
So typically with these, the question was Louisville got down to minus 22 with that 1994 event, and Shelbyville got down to minus 37. Well, I'm going to compare to what we saw in 2015. In 2015, Shelbyville saw the coldest temperature at minus 32 degrees. So 2 or 3 days prior to that, we had a major snowstorm. Once again, Lexington got 17 inches of snow. Richmond got 24 inches of snow, so they got 2 feet of snow. Now, whenever you get a lot of snow, you got colder air filtering into the region. Radiational cooling is a big player in how cold you're going to get. So radiational cooling is whenever skies clear out at night. You have calm winds. So you're losing all this heat from the surface. It's escaping back into the atmosphere. And snow cover enhances that effect. So you have a lot of snow on the ground. You have clear skies. You have Arctic air filtering into the region. You got calm winds. You're going to see that thermometer absolutely plummet. So does that answer your question? I assume that was similar to what they had in 1994, but I'm not positive. I'd have to look at snowfall accumulations from that event. Yeah, yeah. So, plus low-lying locations, cold air likes to sink. It's denser, so yeah. Oh man, I'm going too far. I'm pressing this clicker. So you guys already saw the answer. Woolly worms with 2 brown bands are a sign of severe winter weather. Woolly worms with a wide single brown band are a sign of a mild winter. And of course, that is folklore. So woolly worm's coloring can be affected by its larval stage, availability of food, temperature, and moisture during development and species. So it's fun to look at them in the fall months, but you know, they're not meteorologists, so trust Bill Meck or Chris Bailey, whoever that is. So, all right, I think this is my last one. Count the number of cricket chirps in 15 seconds. And add 37 to that number to get the current temperature in Fahrenheit. Thumbs up, thumbs down. It looks like a 50-50 split in the audience, so this is interesting. It's actually truth, so congratulations. Got every single one right. So truth, usually accurate within 2 degrees. It will It will vary a little bit with the exact species, but crickets do chirp faster when it's warmer outside. So those are your fun facts to take home, share with your friends and family. Anyway, so let's get into this weather and climate talk, weather and climate defined. Weather is what you get. So guys, what's the weather like today? It's sunny outside. It's windy outside. What's temperatures like? Wonderful. That's perfect. So that's what we're looking at whenever I specifically say weather. Weather is what you get, state of the atmosphere at some place in time, short-term weather conditions, currently what's happening, what the forecast is telling us. It tells me whenever I wake up in the morning what I should put on to wear for the day. So today I got on a light sweatshirt back in December, looking at the weather forecast on December 22nd. I wanted about 4 layers of clothes that day based on what the weather forecast was saying. In agriculture, it tells us, is it getting dry outside? Should I run irrigation this week? Looking at wind speeds, if I were to spray, can I spray something today based on those wind speeds? Down here is a look at the National Weather Service in Louisville, what their weather forecast is telling us for the next week. So today we're awfully warm, a high of 55 degrees, but we're going to start taking a dip as we get into next work week, and then we get to play with some winter weather. So I'm not making any guarantees on that right now. Winter weather is one of the harder forecasts in this profession, but Groundhog's Day is coming, and it looks like it could be a fun one. So anyways, that's weather. Weather is what you get. Climate is what you expect. So our climate is the average weather conditions over a 30-year period. So our climate is something I can compare our current weather conditions to. So our high temperature today is 55 degrees. That's what the weather is telling us. Our climate tells us that 55 degrees is very warm for this time of year, so 10, 15 degrees above where we normally stand at this time of year. So again, climate is the average weather over a 30-year period. Any point in time during the year, we got monthly averages for our climate, annual averages for our climate. Instead of telling us what I should wear at this today, it's telling me what I should buy for any particular time of the year. So here in Kentucky, it'd be nice to have a winter coat. Maybe if you're down in Florida, you don't necessarily need one. The climate tells us what we can plant in Kentucky. It tells us when I can plant crops in Kentucky. I mean, do we have palm trees in Kentucky? No. That's what our climate tells us. We cannot have palm trees in Kentucky. It tells us the long-term sustainability of our operation moving forward. So today I want to focus on this topic in climate and how our climate has been changing over previous decades, and maybe a look forward as to what we can expect. So this is a look at tracking the changes, looking at annual temperature averages across the United States over the past century. So each of these maps is based on a 30-year set of normals. So you got the 30 years of 1921 through 1950 here. Our last set of normals was based on the 30-year period, 1981 through 2010. And our latest set of normals is based on the years of 1991 through 2020. So these normals are updated every 10 years to show any shifts in our climate across the United States and across the world. Now, looking at these different sets of normals, in some sets of normals, we were cooler than the 20th century average. Some sets of normals were warmer than the 20th century average. You can see that's the case with our last 2 sets of normals here. So we are running much warmer across much of the United States compared to what the 20th century average was across the nation. Now that's looking at temperatures. How about precipitation? Let's just look at this latest set of normals here. We are running wetter across much of the eastern half of the United States compared to that 20th century average, and drier for many locations across the western half of the United States. So here in Kentucky, running warmer, running wetter. here in recent decades. So if I look at the last set of normals and compare it to our current set of normals, this is what you get whenever you're looking at the annual mean temperature change. So our climate on an annual average is about a half to 1 degree warmer here in the state of Kentucky. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if we keep this trend going in the future, that adds up. And we're already seeing some of the impacts of this warming climate, and I'll talk about those here in a second. But looking at precipitation, looking at the difference in annual precipitation. It's a little hard to see on this screen, but a big chunk of the eastern half of the United States is getting much wetter. Here in Kentucky, it's more of a bullseye, so we're showing some of the highest departures and trending to a wetter climate. Here in the Midwest, out across the western half of the United States, quite a few are trending drier out that way. Of course, we've seen the images of Lake Mead, Hoover Dam out there. I actually went and visited last October, and it is a sight to see. You can see the dramatic water drop out that way. So, trending wetter, trending warmer. I put these charts up here to show you how wet and how warm we've been. This is a look at Kentucky's top 10 warmest years on record and Kentucky's top 10 wettest years on record. And this data goes back to 1895. So we're talking 125 plus years now. Now, I highlighted in orange any years in the top 10 that have occurred in the past decade. I highlighted in green any years that occurred in the top 10 in the past decade. Wettest years on record, I should say. So 4 of the top 10 warmest years on record have occurred in the past decade. Again, this is a 125 plus year record. 5 of the top 10 wettest years on record have occurred in the past decade, over the past 125 years. So that's significant stuff. It's getting a lot warmer, a lot wetter here in the state of Kentucky. Now, before I go any further, I talked earlier about it. That doesn't mean we can't have a drought here and there. We saw one this past fall. We saw one the fall of 2016. We saw one the fall of 2019. We can have bouts of dry conditions, but usually, more times than not, the past decade, they've been very short-lived. So impacts of a changing climate in Kentucky. What have we been seeing? What do we expect to see? So warmer winters, where we're at right now. I'm not seeing as much in the way of livestock cold stress like we did back in the day. Of course, we had emergency livestock stressful conditions back in December. But other than that, our winter this year has ran relatively mild, which is similar to where we've been in the recent decade here in the state of Kentucky. And just keeping with livestock over here on the right, this is becoming a big problem for producers because of all the mud. So you guys can think about it. If you're in your mud boots and you're walking out in the mud, what does the mud want to do? It wants to take your boot off with all that suction. Now imagine being a cow and walking through that mud and constantly burning all that energy trying to get through there. So it's becoming a major issue. Even the mobility, getting the hay where it needs to be. Over on the left, I want to include an image. I think it was 2 years ago, we had a big problem with fall armyworm. And that's a pest that does not overwinter here in Kentucky. The problem is, I showed you guys an image earlier that almost the entirety of the United States is getting warmer. So take that information. This pest does not overwinter here, but with warmer temperatures not only in Kentucky, but to our south, that can make the migration easier in years to come. So, something to keep an eye out as we move forward. And of course, flooding has become a huge issue during the winter season. 2021, I showed you guys Beattyville. That followed 3 ice storms. and some warmer temperatures at the end of February, it all turned into runoff and we had big problems. Earlier starts to the growing season here in the state of Kentucky. This is a plot of growing degree days. So essentially I'm relating temperature to the growth of a particular crop or insect. In this case, I used a base temperature of 32 degrees, and I took the average growing degree days for the years of 2012 to 16, plotted with a blue line, and the average growing degree days accumulated through the spring months and winter months of 17 through 21. And what we're seeing here is we're accumulating growing degree days at a more rapid pace earlier in the year, and you're seeing that green up occur earlier in the year. It doesn't happen every year, but we've been seeing this trend lately. Fruit trees might be blooming earlier in the year. Winter wheat may be moving into more advanced growth stages earlier in the year, things of that nature, and that causes problems because we get to the spring months and I shouldn't guarantee, but more than likely, we're going to see a frost or freeze that's going to hit everything back. We saw that in 2017. Was it 2020, I believe? We had temperatures drop into the 20s on May 8th, May 9th. It was a very late freeze that year. So this is becoming an issue as we move forward. Summers have also trended warmer and wetter here in Kentucky. Now, I got friends in livestock. I've been putting quite a few images of these up here, and they love it. The growth has been awesome. The pasture growth has been awesome. Now, this past year we got in the fall, we got drought conditions, and that was no good. But that's some good news. Heat stress is on the increase. I told you cold stress has been on the decrease. Livestock heat stress has been on the increase. So something to keep an eye on moving forward. But I wanted to put this quote on here. This is from Kirsten Wise, our UK Extension plant pathologist. But in field crops, there are pathogens that can take advantage of all weather conditions. For instance, if it is hot and dry, there are certain diseases that can be more prevalent. And if it's cool and wet, we can see other diseases. Warm and wet conditions favor many diseases. So this is going to be a challenge for producers across the state of Kentucky as we get warmer, as we get wetter here in the Bluegrass State, and something to keep in mind for your operation as we move forward. Both. So warmer and wetter climate, going to be an issue. So drought frequency. This is a time series look at something called the U.S. Drought Monitor. This tool shows us the spatial coverage and intensity of drought across the state of Kentucky. At any point in time, I ran this for the past decade or so, going back to the year 2011. The U.S. Drought Monitor ranges from D0, abnormally dry conditions here in this yellow color, to D1 moderate drought, D2 severe drought, D3 extreme drought, and D4 exceptional drought. We have not been in D4 exceptional drought any part of Kentucky since 2012. So it's been a while. Now we've had some bouts of extreme drought, specifically 2016, fall that year. That's whenever we saw all the wildfires across eastern Kentucky down to the Gatlinburg region. 2019, that was our driest September ever recorded. The state only averaged 0.22 of an inch that year. Now that was followed by one of our wetter Octobers ever recorded. So once again, a very short-lived drought. But these flash droughts, what I call them, very short-lived droughts here in the state of Kentucky, they've been prevalent. They can be just as impactful, but it seems like here, the recent decade, they're here and then they're gone. We saw that this past fall. We had a pretty dry fall around here. December came, we started seeing those rainfall events. We got into the start of the new year. We got hammered with rainfall across western Kentucky and going up to the Bluegrass. Some folks got 4 to 5 inches. in a day or two. But again, the take home, they don't last very long here in the state of Kentucky. Now, our warmer climate is resulting in longer growing / grazing seasons here in the state of Kentucky. I got 3 charts here. And in each of these charts, I took the climate normals from 1971 to 2000, the 30-year climate normals in 1981 to 2010, and our latest climate normals from 1991 to 2020. The top graph looks at the average first freeze date for various locations across the state of Kentucky. So, just as an example, let's go to London Corbin Airport. Based on the 1971 to 2000 normals, the average first freeze during that 30-year period occurred on October 16th. We look at where it's at now, October 25th. So we're talking over a week later in the fall, we're seeing our average first freeze occur at London Corbin Airport. Does that mean it's going to happen every year? Does that mean we're not going to have an early freeze or a late freeze, you name it? No. But on average, our first freeze during the fall season is occurring later in the year. Let's go the opposite direction. Let's go to spring. Let's go to Louisville. The average last freeze based on the 1971 to 2000 normals was April 8th in Louisville, Kentucky. It is now March 31st based on the latest set of normals. So a week earlier in the year, we're seeing our average last freeze in Louisville. And that's shared among quite a few of the stations and locations across the state of Kentucky. You combine those two, you get the average freeze-free period, and everyone across the state is seeing an increase in that average frost-freeze period here in the state of Kentucky. So warmer climate, longer growing season, longer grazing season, which, you know, not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it lets you graze a little longer. So.
Good question. So looking at those dates, as a producer, are we thinking that our last frost date, which is typically like May 18th, May 12th, are we looking at bumping that back to the end of April?
She asked if, as a producer, are we looking at our average last freeze date, bumping it earlier in the year? And I would agree with that. That's what the data is showing us. It's, on average, that last freeze is occurring earlier in the year. Now, once again, that doesn't mean it's going to happen every year. I know there's a lot of mention out there. People have asked me, you know, Mother's Day has typically been a date where you put out your tomato plants, your warm season vegetables. And I'm not deviating from that very much at my own house. So, yeah.
It appears to me that even though the last freeze date is earlier now, the variability may be a lot greater. And I think one of the things that's happening in climate change is the variability, not just the average.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And we saw that back in 2020. We had sub-freezing temperatures on May 8th, and it had a huge impact on agriculture across the area. I think the year before we had record yields in terms of winter wheat. We took a big hit in 2020. But yeah, definitely the variability factor also. So, all right, and I wanted to put this on here. Obviously, this has been a huge topic in recent years, natural disasters here in the state of Kentucky. I always start by saying natural disasters are nothing new to our area. I already talked about the Great Flood of 1937 over here on the left. Ice storms. We had 3 back in 2021. January 2009 was a very bad one over in Paducah area, western Kentucky. 2003, we had a big time ice storm here in the Bluegrass. I don't, show of hands, anybody remember 1974 super outbreak? Several of you. So, you know, we look back to December of 2021, and that was a major, major event here in the state of Kentucky. And I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But 1974 was arguably the worst tornado outbreak to ever occur in the United States. There was 148 tornadoes that touched down across 13 states. And to put this into perspective on the intensity of this event, we had one EF4 tornado and 4 EF3s in December of 21. Any guesses as to how many F4 and F5s they had in 1974? 30. 30 F4, F5 tornadoes, so across this 13-state region, and that actually included our strongest tornado to ever occur in the state of Kentucky in Brandenburg, which was an F5 tornado. Yes. Yes, yes, same event. So yeah, we had the 1974 super outbreak. We had the 2012 tornado outbreak hit Salyersville and West Liberty and north of Louisville. And then I want to include something over here in the lower left, an agricultural-based disaster. This was the Easter freeze of 2007. You may remember this. We were late March that year. We had temperatures bust into the 80s, well above normal for this year. And I called it a biological explosion. Everything took off. Fruit trees went into bloom real quick, you name it. And then we got into the first week of April and bam, we had temperatures drop into the 20s. We had temperatures drop in the teens in some locations. And it absolutely devastated agriculture that year. There was a lot of farmers that already had corn and beans in the ground. Of course, you can replant, but fruit trees took a hit, winter wheat took a hit, you name it. So, you know, Kentucky is no stranger to natural disasters. And the past couple years, we've had some rare ones. This is the December 10th, 11th look at the EF4 tornado across western Kentucky. I put the radar imagery up here in the upper left-hand corner. And this is a look at radar reflectivity of this supercell thunderstorm, rotating thunderstorm, every 15, 20 minutes on radar as it went through the area. Now, this was a very rare event here in the state of Kentucky. It was on the ground for 165.7 miles. I did some oral history interviews back last year at the National Farm Machinery Show. Talked to National Weather Service meteorologists. We actually interviewed Governor Beshear. We interviewed the Ag Commissioner, Ryan Quarles. Get everyone's perspective on this event. But something interesting that I never heard of, but we are interviewing the folks from the National Weather Service in Paducah. And, you know, we were looking at this storm on radar that night and knew the next day this was going to be a major tornado survey, which, you know, a tornado survey, for you all that don't know, after the tornado moves through, you go out and do a tornado survey to estimate the damage that occurred and the wind speeds associated with that damage. So there's different damage indicators. In fact, there's 28 damage indicators that may be softwood trees, hardwood trees. It may be a single family residence, an apartment building, you name it. But they were going out and do the surveys to estimate what the peak winds were for various locations across this track. But the military contacted them earlier that morning and said, why don't you meet us in Mayfield? We have a military helicopter that you guys can go with us. And that's whenever it really hit them, because they started in Fulton County and went all the way up to Breckenridge and got back, and their eyes opened and said, that thing was on the ground entirely for over 165 miles. So that's the longest track ever recorded in Kentucky history. The thing that I want to point out with this is, you look over here, it started in Arkansas, went through the Missouri Boot Hill, parts of northwestern Tennessee. It actually lifted in Tennessee. Prior to getting into Tennessee, it was actually on the ground for over 80 miles prior to that. If it did not lift in Tennessee, this would have been the longest tornado track ever recorded in United States history. Now, because it did lift, that record still stays with the 1925 tri-state tornado that went through Missouri, southern Illinois, and lifted in Princeton, Indiana. That was on the ground for 219 miles. But anyways, peak width was 1.13 miles. The peak winds associated with this EF4 tornado was 190 miles per hour. It was 190 across the entire track. At our UK Research and Education Center in Princeton, it got to 170. But down here, it is a little grainy. An EF4 goes all the way up to 200 miles per hour before it gets to EF5, the strongest tornado you can get, anything over 200 miles per hour winds. So this was a very strong EF4 tornado out there. But that's in addition to the 4 EF3s we saw down in south central Kentucky, one of which went through the city of Bowling Green. But I put some statistics up here since 1950. Now this is through 2021, 1,269 tornadoes in the state. Only 44 of those were an F4, EF4, F5, EF5 strength. The scale did change from the Fujiya scale to the enhanced Fujiya scale in the last decade or so. But I want to say that 44 number, these are actually segments. So they actually, that 1,269 tornado number is actually tornado segments, which starts and ends at county lines. So there's actually a lot less than 1,269 tornadoes. You got to think that tornado back in December that year went through numerous counties, which counts as numerous segments. But even with that, only 68 of the 1,269 tornadoes have occurred in the month of December, good for 5.3%. And it was the only F4, EF4 plus tornado occur during the month of December. So moving on to the Eastern Kentucky flooding, another rare event here in the state. The perfect storm again. We had a stationary front line up over Eastern Kentucky, numerous disturbances passing over that frontal boundary. We had plenty of moisture in place, advecting up from the south, from the Gulf of Mexico, and again, perfect storm. Some places got 10 plus inches. The highest total was 14 inches from southern Knott County. Me and my wife went out to Letcher County to help out, and she was asking me, you know, how can a storm do this? And I said, well, imagine 10 inches of rain on every square inch of those mountains. It's only going one direction. It's going down. So exceptional flooding across eastern Kentucky, 13 flash flood warnings, 3 upgrade to flash flood emergencies. Kentucky River set an all-time new record crest at 43.5 feet. And I wanted to put in bold down here, we have to be prepared going into the future because this amount of rainfall could overwhelm any location across the state of Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky, bad location for this to happen, obviously, but if we saw 10 plus inches in Lexington, we would be in trouble. If we saw 10 plus inches in 6 hours here in Frankfort, we'd be in trouble. So doesn't matter the area, this kind of rainfall could devastate any location. Now, that was something called a 1,000-year flood. There was only a 0.1% chance of that flood occurring at any given time throughout the year. The crazy thing is, we've seen multiple 1,000-year floods here the past 2 or 3 years. We had one the day before in St. Louis. They saw 9 inches of rainfall within 24 hours, over 7.5 in just 6 hours. So a lot of rainfall. The year before, August 20th through the 22nd, 2021, out west of Nashville, a little town called Waverly, Tennessee. That's where Loretta Lynn's ranch was. You may have seen the video on social media, but a lot of rainfall within a short period of time. Some of those locations saw 20 plus inches of rainfall. So, you know, this is extreme, but even the extremes are happening more frequently over the past 2 or 3 years. You know, that's not to say, now I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's not to say something like this can't happen over the city of Louisville, Western Kentucky, you name it. So I tell folks we need to be prepared going forward, not just for flooding, severe storms, drought, you name it. So this is a chart from the National Centers of Environmental Information. And this includes all the billion-dollar weather and climate-related disasters that Kentucky has been a part of since 1980. Since 1980, we've been a part, that's all the total events, so over 300 disasters total. But I wanted to change this chart to the events per year. And I'm sorry, this is across the entire United States, but the same theory holds true here in the state of Kentucky. In the 1980s, 31 weather and climate-related disasters. We get to the 1990s, that goes to 55, and 67 in the 2000s, 128 in the 2010s, so nearly doubled that number from the previous decade. Just in the past 5 years, 89. So we're seeing the number of natural disasters increase in this warmer and wetter climate. We're seeing not just here in Kentucky, but across much of the United States. So keeping track of this weather and climate related information, I wanted to close with these resources available to you all throughout the state of Kentucky. I believe this is on the Oak website now. I created something called the Ag Weather Update, and I started this about 2 years ago now, but I try to put one out weekly. I talk about the current weather conditions the past week, what we can expect in the forecast going forward, maybe taking a look at the outlooks out the rest of the month, and give producers, farmers an idea of what to expect moving forward. Now, in association with the UK Ag Weather Center, this is our website. We're a little different. We're compared to, you know, your local 6 p.m. news broadcast, the National Weather Service. We try to relate the weather information to the agricultural sector. So we take the weather forecast and we have a variety of tools and models available to producers across the state to predict diseases, insect generations across the state of Kentucky, growing degree days, livestock heat stress, cold stress. One of our more popular products is something called the Point Ag Forecast. So we go every 3 hours. We digest information from the National Weather Service. We like using that information. They have folks at their offices 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, you name it, constantly trying to put out the best forecasts available. We put that into our grids, and we include agricultural specific forecasts such as spraying conditions, drying conditions, livestock cold stress, heat stress, you name it. So check it out. That is on our website at weather.uky.edu. Yeah. And we can try to get it after the presentation too. If did. Yep. Next, I wanted to talk about an awesome resource we have here in the state of Kentucky. That is the Kentucky Mesonet. So, familiar with it? I know I talked to some folks earlier that are, but We are very lucky. This is a network of research quality weather stations across the state of Kentucky. I believe they are now approaching 80 weather stations. There have been some impacted from the natural disasters the past couple of years, 2 in western Kentucky, and I think several from the flooding in eastern Kentucky. But I always promote this network. It not only helps us in the agricultural sector, but even like the National Weather Service. If we have a line of strong storms pushing through the region, this is going to show the wind gust as that line pushes through, and whether maybe a warning, severe thunderstorm warning, is going to be needed for the next county over. So used in transportation, energy, you name it, variety of sectors across the state of Kentucky. This is what the station looks like, and measures all the standard parameters, air temperature, precip, solar radiation, relative humidity, wind speed, you name it. But in recent years, they've been adding temperatures at different heights, so we can look at temperature inversions, looking at wind speeds at different heights. We have soil temperature, soil moisture available, so we can get a variety of information from these Mesonet stations across the state of Kentucky. Now, they have their own website, kymesonet.org. Awesome product. I use it constantly throughout the year, looking at current temperatures, where the cold front is at based on those temperatures, dew points, you name it. So check that out. But even cooler, they just came out with an app here in the recent year, and this is available on Android or Apple. It's all totally free, and you can actually save your local county on there, so you always have that information at the ready in your hands. So that's the Kentucky Mesonet. If you want to do some research on your own, maybe not look at the Kentucky Mesonet, but other stations across the state of Kentucky, you can use something called the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. Various maps available, but what I like to use is something called the Climate Database. So this is free to use. You just create a username, password, and you can select a station and play with the data however way you want. So this is one way I played with the data. This is a look at Kentucky's annual average temperatures over the past century plus, going all the way back to 1895. Again, I told you earlier about us getting warmer here in the state of Kentucky. I added a trend line on this, and we do have cooler decades in the past. We have warmer decades in the past. But we were talking earlier, something that I want to point out, the 30s are typically associated with our warmest years on record. Look where that trend line is now. It's well above where we were in the 1930s. So this is the warmest we've been over the past century here in the state of Kentucky. But Midwestern Regional Climate Center, a variety of maps available. I talked to you about the changing in frost freeze normals earlier. Our growing season is getting longer. You can look at that on a map on their website, look at that average last freeze in the spring, the average first freeze in the fall. So check them out, the U.S. Drought Monitor, through the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. This is a look at the current U.S. Drought Monitor map across the state of Kentucky. We're looking good, a lot better than where we were back in October, November. Most of the state not showing any drought conditions or abnormally dry conditions anymore. I think we have a slight sliver in the Green River region of western Kentucky, but I'm just hoping we stay this way as we go into the spring months. And I want to give a shout out to the National Weather Service. Your tax dollars goes to them, keep you guys safe, life and property. There are 5 NWS offices across the area that focus on at least some portion of Kentucky. Here in this region, the Louisville National Weather Service office gives us the forecast for this region. But again, various offices across the state. The Northern Bluegrass, Wilmington, Ohio actually administers forecast, and extreme northeastern Kentucky is Charleston, West Virginia. So lastly, if you'd like to, me and the Kentucky Mesonet, the Kentucky Climate Center, we work together. Division of Water's in there too. Once a month, the first Thursday of every month, we have a climate webinar where we focus on what's gone on the past month, forecast going forward, impacts to the agricultural sector, looking hydrologically across the state. It's about a half hour, 45 minutes long. But again, the first Thursday of every month, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. And if you're interested, I'll send out the link. I believe it is on the website. But that's what I got today. I appreciate your time. Again, this is some of the websites associated with what I talked about the past several slides. So, but with that, I'll take questions. So, yes, sir.
I've heard a couple of politicians use something like, oh, well, this was a 100-year rainfall, so you don't need to worry about it. It's not going to happen again for a long time. Isn't that a useless concept now, a 100-year this or a 50-year that? Because things are changing, so it's a useless concept to even talk about.
We've talked about that at UK, and bottom line, these extreme rainfall events are happening much more frequently nowadays. I just showed you a little bit ago, we've had multiple 1,000-year rainfall events across the region. 0.1% chance of those occurring. But, you know, talking with my coworkers, here the past several years, the past decade, we're seeing more and more in the way of 1-2 inch plus rainfall events. 20, 30 years ago, we weren't seeing near this many. Now, I need to get a chart together showing that variation, that frequency is increasing, but we're definitely seeing more in the way of those 100,000-year rainfall events here in recent years. So, yeah.
Two questions. Do you feel that the spring and the fall has sort of shortened, so we're going from winter to spring to summer quicker, and from summer to fall to winter quicker? And the second question is, does it seem like we're having more of a monsoonal type weather pattern with the heavy rains and then drought?
That's a good question. And we have been seeing that this recent decade. But saying that, our winters have trended warmer also. And it seems like that's given us kind of a head start going into the spring months and into the summer months. And during the winter, we haven't seen as much in the way of cold temperatures during the fall months. We did have some cooler spells this past fall, but generally speaking, yeah, it does seem like it goes straight from summer to winter sometimes also. What was your second question? Monsoonal? Monsoonal, yeah. So, monsoonal, it's definitely been getting wetter here in the state of Kentucky, and I don't know if I would go to monsoonal, but we are seeing those heavy rainfall events, which you would associate with monsoons. We are seeing much more in the way of intense storms during the summer months, and that's carrying into the spring and fall months now too. So I can get on board with that. So what was
In my childhood, I remember, at least in my recollection, only that we had much. I had more days in the summer that were over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, in the 50s and 60s. It just seemed that I remember that. And the question is with increased humidity, and it's harder to get the extremely high temperatures. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you know, we saw some 100-degree temperatures across western Kentucky this year. But prior to that, you probably got to go back to 2012 when we were in that extreme exceptional drought out in western Kentucky.
Moisture affects your ability, the temperature to
Yes.
go.
Just a couple of nuts and bolts questions. We have a Mesonet station here at KSU. It's right here on the farm. And I don't think ours has the low air temperature, like the ground level
Yeah.
and the soil temperature. Is that something that they can retrofit?
As far as I know, they can make additions.
And then should we contact like Western Kentucky about that and
Yes,
see
and-
what needs to be done?
Yeah, they have a new, I actually just gave the information, and I can write that down for you, but
Yeah, I'd
they have a
appreciate
new
that.
director down at WKU now of the Kentucky Mesonet. His name is Jerry Brodsky, and he got there in early September, and he was the director of the New York State Mesonet for a while, but he's from Kentucky,
Yeah.
and he wanted to come back home, but yeah.
And then does the UK Ag Weather Center, do you have an app?
We do not have an app right now, but that's actually in the making. So hopefully sooner rather than later.
Do one more question, and I think we're out of time.
Okay, well, I'll be brief. As far as the tornado direction, we are in Union City, Richmond, Kentucky, and we got hit 2 years ago with the New Year's Day tornado. And I'm wondering if that tornado direction has changed, but I was also thinking that it was about early 70s, I think, that one came through the Whitehall area of Richmond and damaged the school. And right off the first exit to Richmond, you'll see a silo but no barn. And when that happened, that's when it wiped out that barn, which is kind of in the same pattern of direction.
Yeah, yeah. Typically, those storms are going to pass southwest to northeast. You don't see much variation in those tornadic tracks. Just based on the direction of motion, they're associated with low pressure systems, and you got counterclockwise rotation around the center of these lows. And those tornadoes usually occur in the warm sector, which you have southwest flow, southwest and northeast winds. So typically the direction, the path of these tornadoes are from southwest to northeast. So, yeah.
Okay, well, Matt, we want to thank you so much. A lot of really neat information. Thank you.
Thank you.